All right, let's talk about 2016 in South Korea. The country was absolutely rocked by a political scandal. I mean, one for the history books. But what happened next? That was maybe even more incredible. We're talking about one of the biggest peaceful protest movements you'll ever see, a literal sea of light that ended up toppling a president.
So you gotta wonder, right? How does that even happen? How can something so simple, a candle, held by millions of regular people, get so powerful that it actually brings down a government? Well, that's exactly the question we're going to unpack here. It's a story that has a few different parts, and it all starts, as these things often do, with a single spark.
So let's start at the beginning. The event that lit that first match? It was a scandal so bizarre and so deep that it sent this massive shockwave through the whole country.
Okay, so at the very center of all this was a private citizen named Choi Soon-sil. She was a close friend of the president, Park Geun-hye. But here's the thing, Choi had no official government job, none. And yet, it came out that she was basically a shadow advisor. We're talking editing the president's speeches, weighing in on major state policy, and it gets worse. She was using her connections to squeeze over 77 billion won, that's around 70 million US dollars, from huge corporations. And the cherry on top? She used her influence to get her daughter into one of the country's top universities. Just wow.
Now, the public's reaction, it wasn't just, oh, I'm mad. It was this deep, gut-punch feeling of betrayal. And you know what? There's actually a name for this. A sociologist, James Jasper, he calls it a moral shock. And it's that dizzying, vertigo-like feeling you get when you find out the world is absolutely not what you thought it was.
And this is really the key here. A moral shock isn't just another bad headline. It's something so outrageous, so off the charts wrong, that it breaks a society's core sense of what's right and fair. And that's what can turn someone who never really cared about politics into a citizen who feels like they have to do something right now.
So that really helps explain why this particular scandal hit so hard. You see, it wasn't just about one person's corruption. It tapped into this really deep, long-simmering frustration with something in Korea called the Gap-Yul dynamic. It actually comes from legal contracts, where Gap is the powerful party and Yul is the one with less power. But it's come to mean this whole social hierarchy. You know, the huge corporations that chaballs over their small suppliers, or the elite golden spoons over everyday people. This scandal just felt like the ultimate, most blatant abuse of that Gap power.
But here's the thing. A moral shock, as powerful as it is, usually isn't enough on its own to start a revolution. A spark is useless without fuel. And believe me, in South Korea at the time, there was a lot of dry tinder just waiting for a match.
You have to remember, just 2 years before this, the whole country went through the absolute trauma of the Sewol ferry disaster. 304 people died, most of them high school kids, in a sinking that should never have happened. And the government's response? It was seen as a total failure. It created this deep, lasting mistrust. But it also did something else. It created these powerful networks of activists. You might remember the yellow ribbon symbol. People who were already organized, already mobilized by their grief and their anger.
And this is where we can bring in a really useful idea called resource mobilization theory. Basically, it says that social movements don't just pop up out of nowhere just because people are angry. Nope, they succeed when they're able to pull together and use all kinds of resources really effectively.
And in this case, boy, did they have resources. For starters, human resources. We're talking millions of people hitting the streets. Then you've got the organizational side, all those networks of unions and civic groups, many of which, as we said, were already fired up from the Sewol tragedy. The movement also had incredible moral authority. I mean, polls showed 70 to 80% public support. That's huge. And finally, you had these powerful cultural resources, like the simple, perfect symbol of the candle.
Okay, so let's recap. You've got the spark, that moral shock, you've got the fuel, all those mobilized resources. But to really, truly make it work, a movement needs one more crucial thing, an opportunity. It has to find the cracks in the system and push right there.
It's kind of like two sides of the same coin, right? On one side, you've got the movement's own internal strength, all its people, its organization, its resources. But on the other side, you've got the external world, the political climate, what's happening in the halls of power. For things to really change, both sides have to line up just right.
And this brings us to another great concept for understanding this, political process theory. All this really says is that a movement's success is all about timing. It's about being able to spot and grab onto these political opportunities. Those rare moments when the powers that be are weak or they're fighting amongst themselves, making them vulnerable to pressure from the outside.
And in late 2016, that window of opportunity didn't just crack open, it flew wide open. First, you started seeing splits among the political elite. As the scandal got uglier, even members of President Park's own party started jumping ship, trying to save themselves. Second, and this is crucial, the South Korean constitution provided a perfectly legal, legitimate way forward: impeachment. This wasn't a coup, it was a constitutional process. And third, other key institutions stepped up. The free press was relentless, they just wouldn't let the story die, and the courts were ready to do their job.
But look, a revolution isn't just about theories and political strategy. At the end of the day, it's about people. It's about the emotional heart of the movement. It's about that one image that everyone remembers. And that's why we call this the Candlelight Revolution.
The famous sociologist, Emil Durkheim, he had this fantastic term for what happens when a huge crowd of people get together for a common cause. He called it collective effervescence. It's that buzzing, electric feeling in the air. That energy that just bonds everyone together and makes you feel like you're a part of something way, way bigger than just yourself.
And that's exactly the vibe you got in Seoul's Gwanghwamun Square. The movement created this really powerful, welcoming identity. It was simple. If you were there holding a candle, you were a candlelight citizen. And every single Saturday, people would gather for these almost ritual-like protests, singing songs, listening to speeches, chanting together. And what was so important is that it was always peaceful. It was family-friendly. That kept the moral high ground and made it a space where everyone, from little kids to grandparents, felt safe and welcome.
I mean, the candle itself, it was just the perfect symbol, wasn't it? It's totally nonviolent. Anyone can get one. And when you see millions of them together, it's just visually breathtaking. It created this unforgettable metaphor, the small, warm light of ordinary people standing together against the cold, dark world of corruption.
So, okay, let's put all these pieces together. You've got the moral shock, you've got the resources, you've got the political opportunity, and this powerful shared identity. How did all of that actually lead to a real, tangible political victory?
While the immense pressure from the streets translated directly into political action, on December 9th, the National Assembly voted, overwhelmingly, to impeach the president, and that included a lot of members from her own party. Then, a few months later, on March 10th, the Constitutional Court made it official with a unanimous decision. She was out, and that triggered a special election which led to a completely peaceful transfer of power. It worked.
So if you were to write a recipe for a peaceful revolution, what would it be? Well, you'd start with one massive moral shock to get the public truly outraged. Then you mix in a whole lot of ready resources, people and groups who are ready to go. You wait for the perfect political opportunity when the system's looking a bit weak, and then you bind it all together with a strong, unified identity and a symbol that everyone can rally behind.
At the end of the day, I think the biggest lesson from the Candlelight Revolution is this. Real, lasting change seems to need a kind of partnership. You absolutely need that incredible, undeniable power of people in the streets, but you also need democratic institutions that are actually strong enough and willing to listen. Institutions that can take the will of the people and turn it into real, legal, constitutional change.
And that really just leaves us with one final, powerful thought to chew on. When all that private anger, all that frustration that millions of people feel individually, finally finds a way to become one single, coordinated public voice, what then is truly impossible?